For our focus on resources now, Kobus Nell from Stanlib, thank you very much for your time. Let's move straight to a story out of the sector. State-owned Zim newspaper says that Zimplats, part of Impala Platinum, is disputing a $28 million charge stemming from royalty payments. The report says that the country's revenue authority had instructed the bank to withdraw the money from Zimplats' bank account. Now the miner has taken the legal route to getting the money back, but major delays are expected since the issue has been declared non-urgent by Zimbabwe's High Court. What about this fiasco? Kobus, give me your thoughts.
Yeah, look, I mean, the royalty increasing from 2.5% in 2008 to the current 10% is by itself bizarre. And look, I mean, the legal system in Zimbabwe has never been one of the best in the world. It's a system where I guess you can put very little trust on at the moment. We've seen it on various other issues as well in Zimbabwe.
You're being very polite, sir.
You got to be. But I mean, yeah, so who knows? I mean, at the moment, you know, it's very loose.
Kevin, this just doesn't augur well for regulatory uncertainty, especially they've got access to Zimplats' bank account.
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, it highlights the problems with doing business in countries that don't have good regulation. And we've seen a couple of other instances in other African countries where companies have run into this type of difficulty. But I just want to ask, in terms of the 28, does that equate the $28 million US? Does that equate to the 10% royalty?
Well, no, my understanding is it's sort of creeped up over time, and somewhere along the time they've not adjusted it, and what exactly happened there is unclear. They haven't been that vocal, or it hasn't been that transparent in terms of exactly those type of numbers, what they've paid to government in terms of these so-called royalty payments in the past.
With this uncertainty hanging over Zimplats, how do you feel about Impala Platinum as a story, as an investment story?
I think, you know, obviously Zimplats is already not a massive percent of Impala's valuation anymore. You know, it's already taken a hit of previous incidents where they, you know, the story came up where they had to give away 50% of Zimplats. That'll probably not happen. They'll probably end up around about 30%, I would argue. So on the back of that and all that uncertainty, the stock has already been nailed. And I think, you know, when these things hit the tape, there's always selling coming into the system, I would argue. There's always some sort of pressure. I won't think this is a huge, you know, game changer for Impala.
What would be the game changer?
I would argue when they lose more than 50% of Zimplats, because that would be a non-comprisable event for Impala. They won't go with that.
But just to understand you correctly, at these levels where Impala is currently trading, would you be buying or selling Impala?
Look, I mean, Impala would be my preferred pick in the sector, but I am still fairly cautious of the sector as a whole. As I said, they're very exposed to Europe and the health of Europe, and at the moment things are not looking great in that department.
I want to touch on copper. It also came under pressure today, and one would assume, I'm now making some correlation, bizarre correlation, but because China says that they potentially are going to bring down capital reserve requirements, one would think that the economy is slowing, and maybe the copper price took fright from that. Is that just a wild guess?
Yeah, I mean, the copper price, if you look at the correlation relative to growth and Chinese growth or global growth, there's not a great correlation. There hasn't been one over the last you know, maybe 18 months
so I definitely shouldn't become an analyst in Impala space, which is what you're saying to me.
But I mean, you know, so I think there's more than that. I think the US dollar plays a big part, and we've seen you know, how much buying actually goes into copper as per se on a weaker dollar, and obviously we've seen, I guess, a theme evolving of maybe a stronger dollar emerging, and maybe a little bit of what's going to come out of this first quarter of 2012. There's a lot of talk that you could see a couple of funny numbers, lower numbers than the market maybe expect to come out of, especially of China. So it's an uncertain quarter, and maybe the market was slightly spooked by that.
Kobus, if you look at the spectrum of commodities, where would you be focusing on now? So you're saying you don't like platinum. Which other commodities would you be focusing on, and therefore from that, which companies?
Yeah, look, I mean, I would start off with the companies, the age-old argument of saying buy the companies where there's tight supply and when there's cost push pressures, and that's the likes of copper at the moment. Diamonds falls into that camp. And mineral sands, you know, Exaro's mineral sands, we've seen how those prices accelerated, and the price outlook also looks very strong, specifically because of very tight supplies. Then also I would look at commodities that will do well in a slower, generally slower growth environment, and gold comes up. You know, it's a commodity that thrives in a lower growth environment.
I didn't mention gold.
I'm not going there. I haven't said a word.
I just want to put that on the table before we go further into this discussion.
Kobus likes gold. Right, what can I say?
Yeah. So let's go forward with this gold thesis.
Yeah, exactly. So because of the negative real yields, you know, global growth have been revised downwards for 2012 in general, and I think, you know, of the probability of seeing that negative real yield, US negative real yield, is going to turn in a flash. It's probably a low probability for that. And you know, so I would argue gold will still do relatively well in that kind of environment.
But now, how could somebody capitalize on that statement, given the fact that gold has run so hard? They're currently sitting at about $1,600 an ounce or thereabouts. What would you do?
Well,
are you heading into the gold miners, or because again that's been a trading opportunity, hasn't it? They have been playing, or still can play, catch up to the gold price?
100%, and I think you've already started to seeing some of the free cash flow coming through in a lot of these gold miners, and that may be a catalyst for the quarters to come. You know, the gold price got a very strong support, I would argue, around 1550. And we've turned on that level, and we've actually came back above 1600 again. And you know, it was a healthy correction. You know, when you sort of see these prices spiraling up and go up in that parabolic form, you normally do see corrections happen. There's a lot of short-term hot money. You know, when it gets pulled, you pull through triggers, you pull through stop losses, derivative markets come into play, and you have that snowball effect that can actually wind down that price very quickly. But to me, you know, for the price to have consolidated above that 1550 level and sort of strengthen up to 1600, I'm fairly positive on the gold price.
Which of the gold miners are the least hedged then, and have that ability to benefit from the price directly?
Yeah, look, theoretically Harmony, it's the company with the highest operational leverage, but they had problems in the past of actually coming through and delivering the goods. Anglo Gold unwind their hedge already, so all three South African gold mines are unhedged.
Do you have a preferred pick?
Goldfields. Valuation-wise, it's probably not the best quality. I do agree Anglo Gold is the blue chip gold stock in South Africa, the best diversified, the best quality. But I guess the valuation gap at this stage, to me, in terms of Goldfields over Anglo Gold, warrants maybe exposure towards Goldfields.
Well, look at that. It's the end of the show. There's no time to ask Kevin any questions about gold. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Kobus Nell from Stanlib, and of course a big thank you to my Monday night co-host, Kevin Lings.